Halcyon 9 was a jewel, strung on the invisible thread of a gravity well, forever falling around the colossal, swirling blue of Tethys Prime. From her office in the Interspecies Integration Bureau, Raylan Sereth could watch the gas giant's eternal, silent storms rage across its face. It was a view that should have inspired awe, a sense of cosmic grandeur. Tonight, it only made her feel small. The light from the celestial behemoth washed over her, catching the subtle, pearlescent shimmer of the platinum scales that traced the lines of her temples and the backs of her hands. A trait of her Dracoform heritage, they were more than decoration. They were a part of her, regulators of her internal temperature, a living connection to the fiery heart of her ancestral homeworld. Here, in the sterile, climate-controlled environment of the station, they mostly served to remind her of how far from home she truly was. The station itself was a city of 1,000,000 souls, a grand testament to galactic cooperation, or so the brochures claimed. In reality, it was a node, a crucial but ultimately powerless junction in the vast, glittering web of the lattice. The lattice was everything. It was the credit network that bound 42 star systems in a seamless, instantaneous flow of commerce. It was the silent arbiter of life and death, determining who could afford passage, who could buy medicine, who could even access the emergency airlocks in a crisis. Every transaction, from a corporation acquiring a mining moon to a refugee child buying a synth nutrient bar, was processed, logged, and monetized by its unseen algorithms. And the lattice, for all its supposed impartiality, was the puppet of the Parallax Consortium, a shadowy conglomerate of financiers whose names were never spoken, but whose influence was as pervasive as the vacuum of space. Raylan's terminal chimed, a soft, insistent sound that grated on her nerves. Another report, another denial. The Parallax overseers had, with automated politeness, rejected her fourth petition to increase the basic subsistence stipend for the new arrivals from the collapsed Cygnus colonies. The reason given was a cascade of impenetrable jargon, market-adjusted resource allocation, fiscal drag coefficient, non-optimal viability projections. It was a bloodless, sterile language for telling people they were not worth the cost of keeping alive. She closed the file with a flick of her wrist, the motion sharp and angry. The heat in her core flared, a familiar spark of Dracoform frustration, and the air around her chilled by a degree. Her personal comlink pulsed with a different light, a warm, amber glow she had come to dread. It was a missive from her clan elder on Draco Prime. She didn't need to open it to know its contents. The message would be a tapestry of familial duty and veiled threats, woven around the central imperative, her betrothal. The Sereth clan, once proud and influential, had been financially crippled in the last market realignment engineered by Parallax. Their honor, their legacy, now hinged on a strategic alliance, a marriage to the scion of a rival house with a healthier credit portfolio. They spoke of the familial fire ring, the sacred bond of loyalty and responsibility that defined their culture. But Raylan knew they were twisting its meaning. They weren't asking her to strengthen the clan. They were asking her to sell herself to save it. She let the amber light pulse, unanswered. The weight of one fire ring felt heavier than the entire station. Down in the cacophony and grime of Dock 27, Noah Calder felt a different kind of weight. It was the solid, reassuring heft of an F-01 hyperspanner in his hand. The tool was an antique, a relic from an era before smart wrenches and auto-calibrating torque applicators. It was a simple machine of forged steel, its handle worn smooth by the grip of his father and his grandfather before him. It didn't connect to the lattice. It didn't require a subscription. It simply worked. He was shoulder-deep in the primary coolant line of a battered freighter, the Stardust Drifter. The ship was a rust bucket, barely space-worthy, its hull patched with mismatched plates and sealed with hopeful prayer. Its owners, A family of Grishnaks with 4 trembling hatchlings watched from the catwalk above, their multifaceted eyes wide with anxiety. Their ship was their home, their livelihood, their everything. And the Lattice had just flagged its emission converters as 9% below mandated efficiency. A violation that carried a fine they couldn't possibly pay, and a grounding order that would be a death sentence. "The resonance capacitor is fried," Noah said, his voice muffled by the engine housing. He didn't look up at them. He wasn't one for pleasantries or false reassurances. He was a man of action, of grease and wires, and the quiet satisfaction of a problem solved. He pulled the burnt-out component free. It was a standard, parallax-stamped part, designed to fail within a predictable operational window. A perfect little engine of recurring revenue. The Grishnak patriarch, a being whose chitinous exoskeleton clacked nervously, stammered. The cost, the Lattice quotes a replacement at 3,000 credits. We do not have it. Noah finally emerged from the engine bay, wiping his calloused hands on an already filthy rag. His face was smudged with lubricant, his human features a stark contrast to the diverse alien anatomies that populated the docks. He was an unassuming figure, quiet and perpetually tired-looking, easily lost in the crowd. He held up the fried capacitor. "This is junk, but the housing is good." He turned to his workbench, a chaotic landscape of spare parts, salvaged components, and custom-fabricated tools. He rummaged for a moment before producing a small, unlabeled cylinder. "I can rebuild the core, bypass the proprietary failure sensor. It'll be more efficient, and it won't cost you 3,000 credits." "What will it cost?" the Grishnak matriarch whispered, her voice a series of soft clicks. Noah glanced at the 4 small hatchlings huddled behind her. He saw the frayed edges of their clothes, the hunger in their alien eyes. It was a sight he saw every day, the detritus of a galaxy run by spreadsheets. He turned back to the engine. "Cost is a busted capacitor. Go get your family some hot food. I'll call you when it's done." He didn't wait for their thanks. Already absorbed in the delicate work of splicing Terran ingenuity into a piece of corporate-mandated obsolescence. This was his small rebellion. He couldn't fight the Parallax Consortium. He couldn't rewrite the code of the Lattice. But he could fix an engine. He could keep one more family from being crushed by the gears of the system. For him, that was enough. Raylan decided she needed air. Not the recycled, synthesized atmosphere of the upper spires, but the raw, unfiltered air of the docking bays. It was a chaotic symphony of smells and sounds, the sharp tang of ion discharge, the scent of overheated metal, the low hum of anti-gravity plates, and the babble of 100 different languages. It was the station's messy, vibrant heart, a place where the cold calculus of the Lattice met the sweaty, desperate reality of life. Her duties required her to periodically inspect the integration protocols for new arrivals, ensuring they were processed with a modicum of dignity. It was a losing battle. The protocols were designed by Parallax to be efficient, not humane. As she walked along the gantry overlooking Dock 27, her gaze fell upon the Stardust Drifter. She recognized the ship from the day's docket, another family flagged for financial non-compliance, another case file destined for her unresolved queue. But the ship wasn't grounded. Its running lights were green, and a plume of clean, hot steam vented from its newly repaired coolant line. Below, she saw a lone human figure packing away his tools. He moved with a quiet economy of motion, each action deliberate and sure. He was unremarkable in every way, just another human mechanic in a station teeming with them. Yet, something made her pause. She watched as the Grishnak family descended the ramp. The patriarch tried to press a handful of low-denomination credit chips into the mechanic's hand. The human simply shook his head, gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, and turned back to his workbench. He hadn't done it for glory or recognition. He had done it because it needed to be done. Raylan felt a strange, unfamiliar flicker in her chest. In her world, every action had a price. Every favor was a transaction, a prelude to a future obligation. Altruism was a statistical anomaly, a rounding error in the grand equation of profit and loss. But this man, this quiet Terran with grease on his face and kindness in his refusal, was an aberration, a glitch in the system. For the first time all day, the view of Tethys Prime seemed a little less oppressive. Later that cycle, a minor crisis rippled through the station's logistics network. A shipment of rare cryopreserved biological samples, vital for the atmospheric processors on a developing colony, had arrived in a container sealed by a pre-lattice magnetic lock. The container was ancient, a museum piece. None of the station's digital keys or override codes worked. The Port Authority was ready to declare the shipment a total loss, a bureaucratic write-off that would doom the colony's terraforming project. An overworked logistics officer, desperate, remembered the quiet human in Dock 27 who had a reputation for coaxing old tech back to life. Noah was summoned. He stood before the hulking, rusted container, dwarfed by its size. Officials in crisp uniforms watched with skeptical impatience. He ran a diagnostic on his datapad, the device confirming what they already knew: the lock's firmware was incompatible with any modern system. "It's a lost cause," the lead officer sighed, already composing the failure report in his head. Noah ignored him. He closed his eyes for a moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. He set aside the datapad. His fingers hovered over the container's auxiliary input port, a dusty socket that hadn't been used in centuries. He then began to type, not on a physical keyboard, but on a holographic interface he projected from his wrist. The code that flowed from his fingertips was unlike anything the officials had ever seen. It wasn't the elegant, streamlined syntax of modern programming. It was a clunky, archaic language, full of redundancies and strange, symbolic operators. It looked less like code and more like a forgotten dialect. "What is that?" someone muttered. "Is that a Foundry-class command string?" Noah didn't answer. He finished the line of code with a flourish, a complex symbol that seemed to pulse with a faint light. He hit enter. For a second, nothing happened. The officials began to turn away. Then, with a deep, grinding groan and a shower of rust, the massive bolts of the magnetic lock retracted. The container hissed as the pressure equalized. It was open. Noah simply wiped his hands on his pants. "It's an old trick," he said, his voice flat. "Read it in a history file once." He offered no further explanation. He just gave a nod and walked away, leaving a stunned group of logistics officers staring at the open container, the archaic code still faintly glowing on the port's monitor before it faded to black. The incident was logged as a minor anomaly, a curiosity, but the report crossed Raylan's desk as part of the daily summary. She read it once, then twice. Foundry-class commands were the bedrock of the entire galactic network, the base code upon which the lattice itself had been built. They were theoretical, historical, like the Latin of a dead Earth. No one used them. They were locked away in the deepest archives of the network's architects. A humble mechanic in a dirty dock shouldn't even know they existed, let alone be able to execute one from memory to open a rusty box. That night, Raylan stood at her window again, the blue light of Tethys Prime illuminating her thoughtful expression. The universe, which had seemed so crushingly small and simple, governed by the iron laws of credit and debit, suddenly felt larger. It had a hidden depth, a secret history. It had glitches, a quiet mechanic with calloused hands and knowledge he shouldn't possess. A single act of selfless kindness in a system built on greed. These were small things, tiny points of light in the overwhelming darkness of the Parallax Consortium's control. But they were there. She touched the cool metal of her familial fire ring, a circlet of polished platinum passed down through generations of her clan. It was meant to symbolize connection, duty, and the enduring strength of her people. Her family wanted her to use it as a bargaining chip. But as she looked out at the swirling storms of the gas giant, she felt the first stirrings of a different kind of duty. A duty not just to her bloodline, but to the million souls on the station, to the families in rusted freighters, to the fundamental principle that a life was worth more than its balance sheet. In Dock 27, Noah, Calder, looked out of a grimy porthole at the same view. He held the F-01 wrench in his hands, its familiar weight a comfort. He wasn't thinking about archaic code or grateful aliens. He was thinking about the wear on the gears of a ship's landing strut, and the best alloy to use for a custom-forged replacement. He was a simple man, a mechanic. He fixed things that were broken. It was all he had ever wanted to be. But the universe had a way of breaking things far bigger than engines. And a storm was coming. One that no wrench, no matter how trusted, could fix alone. The two of them, the officer and the mechanic, stood worlds apart. Two lonely souls adrift in the cold, transactional void, unaware that the invisible threads of the lattice were already beginning to pull them together. The alert was not a siren. Sirens were for localized, manageable incidents, a containment breach in a science lab, a cargo shift in the lower holds. This was different. This was a flat, station-wide chime, a single, resonant tone that vibrated through the deck plates and settled deep in the bones. It was the sound of a ship dying. Raylan Sareth was on her feet before the chime had finished its second pulse, her terminal already flaring to life with the incident report. The vessel's name was the Kismet Dawn, a decommissioned asteroid hauler, refitted with a patchwork of life support modules, carrying over 800 refugees from the Asphodel sector. The report was brutally concise: secondary core detonation, catastrophic power failure, life support critical in multiple sections. Location: receiving bay Gamma 7, a temporary berth for the system's unwanted. She was moving before she finished reading, her long, measured strides carrying her through the sterile corridors of the Bureau. Her formal officer's tunic was a stark contrast to the chaos she was about to enter. Team status, she sub-vocalized into her comm link, her voice a calm, steady anchor in the rising tide of panic. Reports flooded her auditory implants. Rescue crews mobilizing, medical teams on standby, damage control units rerouting power. But one line of data stood out, a chilling red flag in the stream of information. The primary blast doors to Bay Gamma 7 were sealed, and the emergency access corridor connecting it to the main station was locked down. Standard procedure to contain a potential chain reaction, and to open it required authorization, financial authorization. By the time she reached the transit hub, the station was a blur of motion. Raylan ignored the frantic civilians and pushed through to the emergency response shuttle. As the small craft shot through the internal transit tubes, the full picture of the disaster resolved on the main screen. The Kismet Dawn was a wounded beast, venting plasma from a gaping wound in its aft section. The lights across its hull flickered like dying embers. "Life support in the forward habitation ring is failing," the shuttle pilot announced, his voice tight. "That's where they were housing the families, the children." Raylan's jaw tightened. The platinum scales along her temples felt cold against her skin, a physical reaction to the dread coiling in her gut. She was a Dracoform. Her people were born of fire and heat. The thought of life freezing in the silent, unforgiving cold of the void was a primal horror. The scene in the observation gantry for Bay Gamma 7 was one of controlled chaos. Rescue workers in heavy environmental suits stood ready, their tools useless as long as the massive bulkhead to the emergency corridor remained sealed. Through the reinforced plasteel, they could see the failing lights of the Kismet Dawn. On the local comms, they could hear the panicked, fading voices. "Override command sent," a technician reported to Raylan, his face pale and slick with sweat. "The system is..." It's asking for payment. Raylan pushed him aside and stared at the command interface built into the wall. There, in the crisp, non-negotiable font of the lattice, was the demand. Emergency corridor access, sector containment protocol lift. Authorization fee, 500,000 credits. A line of smaller text helpfully explained that the fee covered potential environmental contamination, structural stress evaluation, and network resource allocation. It was the price of a life, calculated by an algorithm. "This is insane," Raylan breathed, her voice a low hiss. "It's a refugee vessel, they have nothing. Send a priority 1 distress waiver. My authority." The technician typed furiously. "Doing it now, ma'am." He shook his head. "It's not working. The request is being bounced back by a parallax high-priority filter. It says the Kismet Dawn has too many outstanding docking violations. It's flagged as a credit risk." A credit risk. 800 souls, suffocating in the dark. And they were a credit risk. The heat in Raylan's core surged, and for a moment, the air around her shimmered. She fought for control, for the icy calm that her rank demanded. Panic would save no one. Meanwhile, in Dock 27, Noah, Calder, heard the chime. He saw the panicked rush of personnel and the flashing lights of the emergency vehicles. He pulled up the public incident report on his workbench monitor. Kismet Dawn, Bay Gamma 7. He knew the ship. He'd seen it limp into port 2 days ago. A ghost ship crewed by ghosts. He had offered to look at their power fluctuations for free, but the captain, a proud, weary woman, had politely refused, unwilling to accept charity she couldn't repay. Now, their secondary core was gone. No one knew what that meant on a ship that old. The power conduits would be daisy-chained, a cascade of failures waiting to happen. Life support would be the first thing to go. He didn't think. He grabbed his tool belt, the F-01 hyperspanner finding its familiar place on his hip, and started running. He wasn't part of any official team. He had no authority, but he knew engines, and he knew that in any disaster, there were always 2 battles, the one fought by the people in charge, and the one fought by the people with wrenches. He used service ladders and maintenance crawlspaces, his knowledge of the station's underbelly getting him to Bay Gamma 7 faster than any official transport. He emerged from a ventilation duct into the bedlam behind the sealed bulkhead. His sudden appearance barely noticed. His eyes, however, saw everything. He saw the impassive demand on the lattice terminal. He saw the desperation on the face of the Dracoform officer. And through the viewport, he saw a section of the Kismet Dawn where the emergency lights were stuttering in their final throes. Habitation Ring 4, the children's section. He also saw the problem they couldn't see from the outside. A plasma conduit, the main power line for that section's life support, had been severed. But the emergency junction on the other side of the bulkhead was still live. If he could get through the door, he could bridge the gap. Raylan's mind was racing. Every appeal, every override she tried, slammed into the unyielding wall of parallax bureaucracy. The system was designed to be frictionless for the wealthy and a fortress for the poor. She could hear the bio-trackers from the ship. Heart rates were dropping. Oxygen levels were plummeting. They had minutes. Then her eyes fell on a small, rarely used icon on the payment screen, asset-based collateral authorization. It was a feature for corporations, a way to leverage company holdings for immediate liquidity. But it could be used by individuals, if the asset was valuable enough and registered on the lattice. Her hand instinctively went to the platinum circlet on her left wrist, the Seraph fire ring. It wasn't just jewelry. It was a data crypt containing the history of her clan, their lineage, their honors. It was a symbol of their very identity, their connection to their ancestors, and their future. It was, according to the last lattice appraisal, worth a fortune. It was the key to the advantageous marriage that was supposed to save her family from ruin. She looked from the cold, glowing screen to the dark, silent ship. The faces of the refugee children she had seen in the processing center flashed in her mind. Her family's honor, or their lives. The choice was so monstrous, so fundamentally wrong, that it almost paralyzed her. She thought of the sacred vows associated with the ring: to protect, to shelter, to act with honor. What honor was there in letting children die to preserve a symbol? "Damn you," she whispered, not to anyone in particular, but to the entire, soulless system. She stepped forward and pressed the fire ring against the bioscanner beneath the screen. "Authorize collateral transfer against this asset for priority access. Code Seraph 9 Delta." The system hummed, for a heart-stopping second. It analyzed the intricate data filigree of the ring. Then, a new message appeared on the screen, its green glow obscene in the red light of the emergency. "Transaction complete. Asset held in escrow. Welcome, priority client." With a deafening hiss of hydraulics, the massive bulkhead to the emergency corridor began to open. The moment the gap was wide enough, Noah squeezed through, moving with a purpose that caught Raylan's eye. He wasn't wearing a rescue suit, just his grease-stained overalls. "The plasma conduit to the kids' section is severed," he shouted over the noise. "Life support is on its last capacitor charge. I need to bridge it from this side." Raylan didn't question him. There was an authority in his voice that had nothing to do with rank. "Go," she commanded, turning to her own team. "Full evac. Start with Habitation 4. Move." The rescue was a blur of frantic, coordinated activity. Raylan directed the teams, her commands crisp and clear, a beacon of order in the chaos. But a part of her awareness was fixed on the human mechanic. She watched as he wrenched open a service panel on the corridor wall, exposing a thick, glowing power conduit. He worked with a speed and precision that was mesmerizing. There were no diagnostics, no schematics. His hands just seemed to know where to go, what to touch. He pulled a length of heavy-gauge cable from his belt and, using the insulated handle of his antique F-01 spanner, began to manually attach it to the live junction. It was an act of controlled insanity. A single slip, a moment of miscalculation, and the raw, unshielded plasma would have vaporized him. Raylan saw the station's automated safety protocols flare up on a nearby monitor, trying to shut down the junction. But something strange happened. Each time a shutdown command was issued, it was met with an instant system-level countermand. Priority Alpha. Manual override engaged. Do not interfere. The commands weren't coming from her, or from station control. They seemed to be generated by the network itself, as if the lattice were actively protecting him, clearing a path for his reckless, analog intervention. With a final grunt of effort, Noah slammed the makeshift connection into place. Sparks showered around him. On the other side of the viewport, Habitation Ring 4, which had gone completely dark, suddenly flickered back to life. The thin, reedy sound of the life support fans kicking in was the most beautiful sound Raylan had ever heard. Hours later, the last of the survivors had been evacuated. The immediate crisis was over. The Kismet Dawn was a tomb, but its people were alive. Raylan found Noah in the now silent emergency corridor, slumped against the wall next to the panel he had hot-wired. The space was frigid, the emergency cooling system still running at full blast to vent the residual heat. He was shivering, his thin overalls offering little protection. Raylan walked over and sat down beside him, a few inches of respectful distance between them. They didn't speak for a long time, just listening to the hum of the station around them. "You were very brave," she said finally, her voice softer than she intended. He just shook his head, his teeth chattering slightly. "I just connected a wire. You're the one who opened the door." He looked at her bare wrist. "That must have been some door." He was looking at the faint indentation on her skin where the fire ring had rested for her entire adult life. She felt a pang of loss so sharp It was like a physical blow. She had saved them, but she had lost a piece of herself. The guilt gnawed at her, not for the choice she made, but for the universe that had forced her to make it. She felt Noah shiver again beside her. Without a second thought, she unclasped the high-collared, thermally adaptive cloak of her uniform. A dracoform could regulate their own temperature. She didn't need it. She draped it over his shoulders. He looked up, surprised, his tired eyes meeting hers for the first time. The cloak automatically tightened, its internal filaments warming to counteract the cold. "Thank you," he murmured, the shivering subsiding. They fell silent again, two very different beings, a high-ranking officer and a humble mechanic, leaning back to back in the cold, united by the exhaustion of a shared victory. It was a fleeting moment of peace, shattered by the chime of her official datapad. The message was from Station Command. It was a formal notice. An inquiry had been launched into financial irregularities during the Kismet Dawn rescue. A special investigator was being dispatched from the Parallax Consortium's regional headquarters. Her name was Ariad Kane. Ariad Kane arrived the next day. She did not come on a public transport or a standard shuttle. She arrived on a private, matte black courier ship that hummed with quiet, expensive power. She was a tall woman with hair the color of spun silver, pulled into a severe chignon, and eyes the color of a winter sky. She moved with the predatory grace of someone who had never been told no in her life. They met in Raylan's office. The grand view of Tethys Prime, a backdrop to the confrontation. Ariad did not sit. She prowled the room, her gaze sweeping over it with casual disdain. "Officer Sareth," she began, her voice smooth and cold as polished marble. "I've reviewed the logs from the Kismet Dawn incident. A commendable rescue, from a purely logistical standpoint. However, the unsanctioned leveraging of a culturally significant asset to bypass standard financial protocols is problematic." "It was a choice between a protocol and 800 lives," Raylan countered, her own voice level. "I chose lives." Ariad smiled, a thin, bloodless expression. "A noble sentiment, and an expensive one. Parallax exists to ensure stability. Stability requires adherence to the system. When you act outside the system, you create chaos. You also created a significant debit. The asset, your fire ring, is now collateral against that debit. It will remain in a secure Parallax vault until the debt is cleared." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Which, at your current salary, should be in approximately 400 years. Rage, cold and pure, flared within Raylan. The system was going to let them die. The system was assessing viability. Ariad corrected her smoothly. Those refugees were a net drain. No marketable skills. No assets. From a purely economic perspective, their survival represents a net loss to the system. You simply transferred that loss onto yourself. An act of financial martyrdom, I suppose." She gestured to the terminal. "Now, about the unauthorized technician who tampered with a primary power conduit. The logs are curiously blank regarding his identity. A ghost." As Ariad spoke, she brought up the incident file. Raylan leaned forward, watching the data stream. Ariad was right. Her own biosignature was flagged everywhere, linked to the collateral transaction, the door override, the evac command. But where Noah's presence should have been logged at the corridor access point, at the power junction, there was nothing. Just a corrupted data packet with a single, repeating line: access denied, identity shielded, priority alpha. Raylan's mind raced back to the strange countermands she had seen. The system hadn't just ignored him. It had actively hidden him. It had recognized a level of authority that superseded even a Parallax investigator. Her suspicion about the quiet mechanic from Dock 27 hardened into a certainty. He was infinitely more than he appeared to be. Ariad finally turned from the window, her inspection complete. "Find the ghost, officer. Make an example of him. As for the refugees," she added, a note of finality in her voice, "they will be processed and relocated to a minimal subsistence labor colony. Their debt to society, and to you, must be paid." She looked at Raylan, her eyes devoid of any empathy. "You see, officer, kindness is the most expensive luxury in the galaxy, and it seems you can no longer afford it." After Ariad left, a chilling silence descended on the office. Raylan stood for a long time, her hand tracing the empty space on her wrist. The investigator's words echoed in her mind, a perfect distillation of the consortium's philosophy. They had turned survival into a commodity and compassion into a crime. She thought of Noah, the ghost in the machine, and the mystery he represented. She thought of her family's legacy, locked away in a corporate vault, and she thought of Ariad Kane's smug, cruel smile. A new kind of fire began to burn in Raylan's core. It was not the panicked heat of desperation, but the slow, deliberate burn of vengeance. They had taken her history. They had insulted her honor. They had put a price on mercy. She would get her fire ring back, and then she would burn their entire, corrupt system to the ground. The chill Ariad Kane left behind in Raylan's office was more profound than any vacuum. It was a coldness of the soul, a void where empathy should have been. For an hour after the investigator's departure, Raylan stood motionless, the ghost weight of her fire ring a constant, aching reminder on her wrist. They hadn't just taken a piece of metal. They had taken a piece of her history, her identity, and held it hostage. Ariad's parting words echoed in her mind. Kindness is the most expensive luxury in the galaxy. A challenge. A declaration of war. Raylan intended to make her regret it. Her first move was not one of passion, but of pragmatism. She needed allies, and on a station owned lock, stock, and barrel by Parallax. True allies were a rarer commodity than breathable air. She started at the top. Captain Idris Vale, the station commander, was a man carved from asteroid iron, his face a roadmap of galactic hardship, and his demeanor one of perpetual, weary patience. He ran Halcyon 9 not as a commander, but as a long-suffering landlord, trying to keep the pipes from bursting while the owners raised the rent. She found him in his Spartan office overlooking the station's central axis, a dizzying panorama of spiraling towers and glittering transit streams. He was staring at a budget projection that bled red ink across the screen. "She was here," Raylan said, foregoing any preamble. Vale didn't turn. "I know. The station's primary credit line was just frozen. Official reason pending review of operational security protocols. Unofficial reason, Ariad Kane doesn't like the way you do business." He finally swiveled his chair to face her, his eyes grim. "She also issued a warrant for your arrest. Abuse of emergency resources. For now, it's sealed. My authority still means something, at least until she files the right paperwork. You have maybe 2 cycles." "I need your help, Idris," she said, her voice low and urgent. He gave a short, bitter laugh. "Help Officer Sereth. I'm a bureaucrat with a fancy title. I have 3 security squads against Parallax's private army. My job is to keep the lights on and the air breathable. Rocking the boat is a luxury I can't afford. And when they decide it's more profitable to turn the air off," Raylan countered, her gaze unwavering. "The Kismet Dawn wasn't an anomaly. It was a field test. They're calculating the cost of a life, Idris, and they've decided it's too high." The truth of her words settled in the space between them, heavy and undeniable. Vale ran a hand over his tired face. "What do you want from me?" "Information. Discretion. A blind eye when necessary. I need to know how they control the lattice. Not the surface-level transaction protocols, but the deep architecture. The core of the beast. Vale was silent for a long moment, his gaze lost in the ceaseless motion of the station beyond the viewport. "There's an old saying," he said softly. "You can't fight the house. You can only hope to change the rules." He tapped a few commands into his console. A data packet, heavily encrypted, was transferred to Raylan's datapad. "This is everything the station has on the Lattice's underlying AI. It's not much. It's called the Axiom Loom. It's a self-correcting financial network designed to maximize profit. That's all we know." He stood up, a silent dismissal. "You didn't get this from me. And Raylan, be careful. Kane doesn't play games. She liquidates assets, human and otherwise." Her next stop was in the underbelly of the station, in a sector known as the Warrens, where the law was a suggestion and hope was a contraband item. Here, in a cramped office piled high with data chips and legal texts, she found Kaya Thorne. Kaya was a public interest lawyer who fought corporations with the ferocity of a cornered Cathar sandcat. She was sharp, cynical, and fueled by a righteous anger that burned brighter than any plasma torch. Kaya listened to Raylan's story without interruption, her fingers steepled, her sharp eyes missing nothing. When Raylan finished, the lawyer leaned back, a sardonic smile playing on her lips. "So, let me get this straight. You declared war on the Parallax Consortium, got your family's priceless heirloom confiscated, and now you want to poke the galaxy's biggest financial monster with a very small legal stick. All for a boatload of refugees who can't pay you a single credit." "Essentially, yes," Raylan admitted. Kaya's smile widened. "I love it. It's the stupidest, most beautifully hopeless thing I've heard all year. I'm in." She immediately began pacing. "The Axiom Loom. I've heard whispers. They say it doesn't just process transactions. It assigns value. It runs predictive models on individuals, colonies, entire species, and assigns them a viability rating. Your credit score is just the tip of the iceberg. This thing rates your very right to exist." "How do we prove it?" Raylan asked. "We need to see the code," Kaya said, her eyes gleaming with predatory excitement. "And we need someone who can read it. Someone who doesn't think like a corporate programmer. We need an artist, a lunatic." That led Raylan to her third recruit. Zixori was the station's leading atmospheric biosystems engineer, a Xylosian whose insectoid appearance belied a mind of dazzling, chaotic brilliance. His primary, official duty was to maintain the delicate balance of the station's ecosystem. His primary, unofficial passion was the creation of the ultimate survival food, a nutrient cake that contained every essential vitamin and mineral, was shelf-stable for a century, and could be produced from recycled carbon. She found him in his biolab, a humid jungle of alien flora and bubbling vats of algae. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and chlorophyll. Zixori, a lanky being with 6 spindly limbs and large, iridescent eyes, was excitedly holding up a small, grayish square. "Behold," he chirped, his mandibles clicking with enthusiasm. "Batch 74 Gamma. I've finally stabilized the protein matrix and enhanced the flavor profile." Raylan eyed the gray cake with suspicion. "Enhanced it from what?" "From the vague suggestion of industrial solvent to the more robust notes of damp concrete," Zixori explained proudly. "It's progress." Raylan decided to change the subject. She showed him the data packet from Captain Vale. Zixori's multifaceted eyes scanned the complex equations and code fragments, his antennae twitching. The playful demeanor vanished, replaced by a focused intensity. "Fascinating," he hummed. "This isn't just a financial AI. This is a predictive ecosystem. It views the galaxy as a closed resource loop. It prunes inefficiencies, inefficient businesses, inefficient colonies, inefficient people." Raylan finished for him. Can you get inside it? Find proof of this viability rating. Get inside, Zixori trilled, a sound of pure intellectual delight. My dear officer, this is the most beautifully complex, horrifyingly elegant system I have ever seen. Trying to get inside it would be like trying to teach a star to sing. But perhaps one could listen for the notes it was never meant to produce. He gestured around his lab. I can repurpose my atmospheric sensors to scan for residual data streams, ghost signals in the lattice's network. If the Axiom loom is making these calculations, it has to leave a trace, no matter how faint. With her team of a disillusioned captain, a pugnacious lawyer, and a mad scientist assembled, only one piece was missing: the ghost in the machine. She found Noah in Dock 27, his back to her, as he meticulously repaired a damaged cargo drone. The system hid you, she said, her voice cutting through the noise of the dock. Noah froze, his hands hovering over the drone's exposed wiring. He slowly turned around, his face unreadable. He looked from her to the empty space on her wrist. I heard what you did, he said quietly. That was a hell of a thing. It was necessary, she replied, stepping closer. Just like your manual override was necessary. The station logs show a priority alpha clearance shielding your identity. That's a clearance level that, technically, doesn't exist. Explain it. He sighed, putting down his tools. It's complicated. I have time, she said, her voice hard as steel. Some systems have legacy protocols, he said, choosing his words carefully. Old backdoors left by the original designers. Sometimes, if you know the right language, you can wake them up. And you just happen to know the dead language of the galaxy's most powerful financial network. Raylan pressed, her skepticism palpable. The mechanic who fixes refugee ships for free. I like fixing things, he said simply. And I don't like seeing people get hurt. He looked at her, his gaze direct and honest. I don't work for Parallax. I never have. Everything I did during the rescue was to help those people. Can you believe that? She wanted to, desperately. Every instinct she had, honed by years of navigating bureaucratic deception, screamed that he was hiding something monumental. But her heart, a part of her, she had long learned to ignore, saw the sincerity in his tired eyes, the grease under his fingernails, the memory of him draping her cloak over his shivering shoulders. For now, she said, we're fighting back. I have a team. We need you. We need your old tricks. Noah didn't hesitate. Okay. Their secret headquarters became Zixori's biolab, a humid, chaotic sanctuary of defiance. While Zixori tuned his sensors, Kaya dug through galactic legal precedents, searching for a loophole, a forgotten clause they could use against Parallax. Raylan coordinated their efforts, her strategic mind piecing together the fragments of information. And Noah. Noah was their skeleton key. He would sit for hours, staring at the data stream Zixori captured, his fingers occasionally tracing an unseen pattern in the air. Then, he would quietly suggest a new search parameter, a new frequency to scan, and every time, it would yield a new piece of the puzzle. Their first breakthrough was horrifying. Zixori isolated a recurring data pattern tied to the station's medical bay. It was a subroutine in the Axiom loom that cross-referenced mortality records with outstanding debts. It's delaying the final processing of death certificates for debtors, Kaya breathed, her face ashen as she read the report. It keeps their accounts active for an average of 3 cycles after they've died. It allows the loom to continue charging interest, leveraging their phantom assets in microsecond-long market trades. They're making money from the dead. Their next discovery was even worse. The station's refugee relief fund, the very budget Raylan fought for, was a complete fiction. The credits aren't real, Zixori explained, his antennae drooping. The Axiom loom creates a line of synthetic debt, assigns it to Halcyon 9 and then generously allows the station to draw from it. We're not helping the refugees with our money. We're burying them, and ourselves, under a mountain of imaginary debt that accrues very real interest. The weight of the conspiracy pressed down on Raylan. Was her fight making things worse? Was she dragging the entire station into a war it couldn't win? The doubt was a poison, seeping into her resolve. One evening, seeing the strain on her face, Noah approached her. "My people have a saying," he said, his voice soft. "All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy." "I'm not a boy," she retorted, the dracoform heat rising in her voice. "And this is not play." "I know," he said, unflustered. "But sometimes you have to step away from the fire to see how big it's gotten." He hesitated. I heard it's the eve of the first flame. For your people." Raylan was taken aback. The eve of the first flame was a minor dracoform observance, a quiet night of remembrance for the lighting of the first ancestral fire. It was about community, connection, and finding warmth in the cold. It was barely known outside her own culture. "How did you know that?" "Read it in a history file," he said, the same non-answer he'd used before. "I just figured. You shouldn't be alone tonight." And so, Raylan found herself leading Noah to a small, private chamber in the Dracoform Cultural Center. The room was simple, dominated by a central fire pit where the flames burned with a clean, blue heat. She lit a ceremonial taper and began the ritual, her voice reciting the ancient verses that spoke of creation and loss, of duty and hope. Noah stood back, a respectful observer. He didn't understand the words, but he seemed to understand the feeling behind them. He watched as she moved through the precise, symbolic gestures of the rite, his expression one of quiet reverence. When the ceremony was over, she sat by the fire, the warmth a welcome comfort. He sat with her, not too close, but not too far. The silence between them was no longer one of suspicion, but of shared understanding. It was a fragile, unspoken truce, a moment of warmth in the encroaching cold. The truce was shattered the following cycle. Ariad Kane made her move. A station-wide alert announced that, due to the ongoing security review, all non-essential power would be rationed, and all public accounts for Halcyon 9 were indefinitely frozen. The lights in the corridors dimmed. The cheerful holographic advertisements flickered and died. A grim, fearful quiet began to settle over the station. An official communique was delivered to Raylan. Parallax was formally declaring its intent to permanently seize the Seraph fire ring to cover the outstanding damages from the rescue. And Captain Vale's protection finally crumbled. The sealed warrant for her arrest was made public. Raylan Seraph was now a fugitive. As if on cue, the universe decided to pile on. Alarms blared as Tethys Prime, the beautiful silent gas giant, threw a tantrum. A massive ion storm erupted from its upper atmosphere, a swirling vortex of electromagnetic fury that swept towards Halcyon 9. All external communications were cut off. All automated docking procedures were suspended. The station was isolated, a tiny island in a raging cosmic sea. The atmospheric scrubbers on the outer ring need a fresh isotope catalyst every 12 hours, Zixori announced, his voice tight with worry. The automated supply drone was caught in the first wave of the storm. Without that catalyst, the air in those sectors will become toxic in less than a day. "We'll have to take it manually," Raylan said, already pulling up a schematic of the outer maintenance conduits. "Through that storm," Kaya exclaimed. "That's suicide. The EM field will fry any standard vehicle's navigation." "We won't use a standard vehicle," Noah said, stepping forward. He was pointing to a schematic of a small, antiquated maintenance sled. "This one's an old M-class, purely mechanical controls, no integrated navigation. Its systems are shielded, but it has to be flown by hand, by sight." I'll go with you, Raylan stated. It was a terrifying journey. The tiny sled bucked and shuddered as they navigated the storm. Sheets of purple and green energy washed over their viewport, and the hull groaned under the strain. Raylan's Dracoform ability to regulate temperature allowed her to compensate for the wild fluctuations in the sled's internal climate control as the storm battered them. Noah, meanwhile, was a rock. His hands were steady on the manual controls, his eyes fixed on the distant lights of the outer ring, guiding them through the tempest with an instinct that defied logic. They were halfway there when a particularly violent wave of energy struck them. The sled's internal lights died, plunging them into darkness save for the storm's ethereal glow. "We've lost primary power," Noah said, his voice calm but strained. "I'm on batteries, but they won't last long." In the flickering darkness, the fear that Raylan had been suppressing finally surfaced. "I did this," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the howl of the storm. "I brought this all down on us. The station, the warrant, all of it. I should have just left it alone." Noah turned to look at her, his face illuminated by a flash of lightning. "No, you did what was right. The system is what's wrong. Not you." He paused, then said, "There is a way to fix this. All of it. I have a way. But it's difficult, and it's dangerous." He didn't elaborate, his cryptic promise hanging in the air, a seed of hope wrapped in a husk of doubt. Before she could press him, he managed to reboot the primary systems, and the lights flickered back on. They delivered the catalyst and made it back to the relative safety of the main station, just as the storm began to subside. They were exhausted, battered, but alive. Back in Zixori's lab, the mood was grim. They were fugitives on a dying station, fighting a foe that controlled reality itself. Zixori, in an attempt to lift their spirits, offered them his latest creation. "Batch 75 Alpha," he announced. "I believe I've perfected it." He handed a dense, perfectly square, brownish cake to Noah. Kaya eyed it, as if it were a live explosive. Raylan, lost in her own thoughts, barely noticed. Noah, however, took the cake without a word. He broke off a corner and ate it. His expression didn't change. He chewed thoughtfully, swallowed, and then took another bite. "Well," Zixori demanded, vibrating with anticipation. "It's substantial," Noah said diplomatically. "You can really taste the minerals." Zixori beamed. "Exactly." Watching this small, absurd moment of interaction, something inside Raylan broke. A laugh escaped her lips. It started small, a single, choked sound, but it grew into a full, genuine peal of laughter. The absurdity of it all, the galactic conspiracy, the ion storm, the arrest warrant, and this quiet, grease-stained man solemnly eating a nutrient cake that likely tasted like a paving stone was suddenly, overwhelmingly funny. Noah looked at her, a small, rare smile touching his own lips. For a moment, the weight of the universe lifted. It was that night that they found their target, buried deep within the data ghosts Zixori had captured. Noah found a reference, a single line of archaic code that shouldn't have been there. It mentioned a failsafe, a master override key for the Axiom Loom's core logic. It was called the Cytherean key, and the code pointed to its location, a place called Vault Cytherean, a high-security parallax data bunker built into the heart of Tethys Prime's largest and most unstable ice moon. The laughter died away, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. They had a target. They had a goal. Raylan looked at the faces of her small, impossible team, the lawyer, the scientist, the mechanic, all of them fugitives now because of her. And she looked at the holographic schematic of the icebound vault, a fortress of data protected by every piece of high technology Parallax could buy. "Well," Kaya said, breaking the silence as she stared at the impossible task ahead of them. "It's a good thing I love a challenge." The ice moon, Cytherea, was a shard of frozen chaos hanging in the velvet black, its surface a jagged mess of cryogenic geysers and razor-edged methane ice. From the cockpit of their stolen, heavily modified long-range shuttle, a rust bucket christened the Unlikely Prospect by Kaya Vault. Cytherean was an invisible scar on the landscape. It was buried 3 kilometers beneath the surface, a tomb of data protected by the most sophisticated security system in the known galaxy. "According to the schematics I acquired," Kaya said from the co-pilot's seat, her voice a little too cheerful for the circumstances. "The entire facility is run by a localized subroutine of the Axiom Loom. It's a predictive AI. It doesn't just look for intruders. It models the probability of an intrusion and preemptively reinforces security in that sector. It thinks." "Then we have to be unpredictable," Raylan stated, her eyes fixed on the approach vector. As a fugitive, she was no longer in uniform. She wore a dark, thermally insulated suit, the practical attire of an infiltrator, yet she carried herself with the same unwavering authority. "It's hard to be unpredictable when the front door is a 10-meter-thick cryo-alloy blast door, and the only key is a quantum-encrypted signal broadcast from Parallax headquarters," Zixori chirped from the engineering station, his 6 limbs a blur as he monitored their energy signatures. "Our very presence here is a predictable anomaly." "We're not using the front door," Noah said. He was hunched over a secondary console, his familiar overalls replaced by a suit similar to Raylan's. He had a set of physical blueprints, actual paper-thin sheets of printed schematics spread across the console. A bizarrely analog sight in the hyper-digital cockpit. "We're going in through the plumbing." He tapped a diagram showing a thermal exhaust vent, a relic from the vault's initial construction, designed to vent waste heat from the deep geothermal drills that powered the facility. The AI ignores it. It's an inefficient, low-tech system. In the Loom's calculations, it's not a viable infiltration point because no modern ship can navigate the vent system without being torn apart. "And the Unlikely Prospect can?" Kaya asked, raising a skeptical eyebrow. "No," Noah said flatly. "But I rerouted the manual steering controls through this." He held up a small, metal box covered in toggle switches and analog dials. It looked like something from a museum. "No digital footprint. The ship's computer will think we're just holding a stationary orbit. I'll be flying us by hand, using the ship's gravimetric sensors to feel our way through." The descent into the thermal vent was a masterclass in controlled chaos. As Noah wrestled with his makeshift controls, the shuttle scraping against the icy walls of the narrow tunnel. Raylan stood beside him, one hand pressed against the cockpit's viewport. Outside, the ice wasn't just cold, it was a living network of sensors, microscopic filaments that detected the slightest change in temperature or pressure. "The thermal sensors are cycling," she said, her eyes closed in concentration. As a Dracoform, she could feel the subtle energy shifts, the wave of a scanning field washing over the hull. They're calibrated to detect the heat of a ship's engine or a person's body. "Can you fool them?" Noah asked, his knuckles white as he forced the shuttle through a tight corkscrew turn. "I can do better," she murmured. "I can hide us." She took a deep breath. The air around her grew colder, the moisture condensing and freezing on the nearby bulkheads. She was drawing the heat from her surroundings, from the ship itself, pulling it into her own core. Then, with intense focus, she exhaled. Not a breath of air, but a whisper of pure thermal energy directed through the hull. It wasn't a blast of heat, but a subtle, controlled emission, a wave of warmth that perfectly mimicked the natural geothermal signature of the ice around them. Outside the ship, The sensor network registered the passing of their shuttle as nothing more than a pocket of slightly warmer ice, a common and insignificant geological anomaly. It was a delicate, draining dance. Noah piloted them through the physical labyrinth, his instincts and mechanical skill their only guide. Raylan navigated them through the invisible web of sensors, her unique biology their only shield. They were two halves of a single, impossible key, turning in a lock that was never designed to be opened. When they finally reached the sublevel access point, a maintenance airlock deep within the moon's crust, they were exhausted, but successful. Zixori stayed with the ship, tasked with creating a data loop that would mask their presence. Kaya remained at the comm station, their only link to the outside. Raylan and Noah stepped out into the silent, frozen corridors of Vault Cytherian. The inside of the vault was a cathedral of cold, blue light. The air was sterile and still. Automated cleaning drones glided silently along the floors, and the only sound was the faint, omnipresent hum of the AI's core. "The main data hub is 3 levels down," Noah whispered, consulting a small, handheld device that was conspicuously not connected to any network. "The AI will be expecting a digital assault, a virus, a codebreaker. It won't be expecting a wrench." He patted the F-01 hyperspanner on his hip. Their progress was slow and deliberate. They bypassed laser grids by Raylan, using her focused breath to create a temporary fog of ice crystals, scattering the beams. They opened magnetically sealed doors with Noah physically overriding the locking mechanisms, using his wrench to manually turn the emergency release bolts that hadn't been touched in decades. Every step was a rejection of the digital world they found themselves in, a testament to the power of the physical, the analog, the real. Finally, they stood before the entrance to the data core. It wasn't a door, but a seamless wall of polished obsidian. "There's no physical lock," Raylan observed. "It must be biometrically sealed." "It is," Noah confirmed. "And the AI will sound every alarm in the system if we try to force it. But the designers had to have a way to get in if the system ever crashed." He knelt down and ran his fingers along the base of the wall, his touch light and searching. He found a seam, almost invisible to the naked eye. Prying it open with the tip of a thin blade, he revealed a single, archaic-looking input port, identical to the one he had used on the locked container back at the station. Raylan watched, her breath held. This was it, the moment of truth. Was he just a mechanic with a strange hobby, or something more? Noah didn't hesitate. He projected the holographic interface from his wrist, and his fingers flew, typing out the same forgotten, symbolic language she had seen before. The Foundry-class commands. The code flowed into the port, not as an attack, but as a greeting, a conversation with the vault's oldest, deepest systems. The obsidian wall shimmered, and a section of it dissolved into a shimmering curtain of light. They stepped through. The data core was a space that defied logic. It was a vast, dark sphere, and in its center pulsed a star of pure information, the heart of the Axiom Loom's backup memory. Strands of light, representing trillions of terabytes of data, flowed from the core in a celestial web. "The Cytherian key," Noah said, his voice filled with a strange reverence. "It's not a program. It's a signature, a biometric marker embedded in the Loom's Genesis code. It proves ownership." He stepped up to a floating console, the only solid object in the room. "I can isolate the Genesis block, but I'll need you to help me contain the data surge when I access it." As Noah worked, his fingers a blur on the console, Raylan focused her will, creating a subtle thermal field around them, a buffer to shield them from the raw energy of the data core. A stream of pure code, the very DNA of the lattice, flowed onto the console screen. It was beautiful and terrifying, a language of pure mathematics that defined the lives of quadrillions of beings. "There," Noah breathed, The Genesis signature, the proof of who created this. A string of alphanumeric code resolved on the screen, followed by a complex, rotating biometric marker. It was a DNA sequence, a retinal pattern, and a neural activity map, all woven together into an unbreakable cryptographic lock. It was labeled with a single, cryptic word, Foundry. Kaya's voice crackled in their earpieces, patched through Zixori's jury-rigged comms link. "We have it. I'm running a cross-reference against every known biometric database in the 42 systems. It's heavily shielded. Almost nothing there. Just a ghost of a file in the Terran archives." A long pause. "Wait. I'm getting a match. A low-resolution scan from an old military service record. The biometric signature. It's a 99.997% match for..." Another pause. This one filled with disbelief. "For Noah Calder." The world tilted. Raylan stared at the screen, at the name Foundry, and the biometric data that was an undeniable match for the man standing next to her. The blood drained from her face, and the air around her turned to ice. Every strange event, every unexplainable skill, every cryptic answer suddenly snapped into a horrific, new perspective. The priority alpha clearance, the knowledge of Foundry-class commands. He wasn't some gifted mechanic. He wasn't a ghost in the machine. He was the machine. Or at least, its creator. He was tied to the very system that had enslaved the galaxy. The system that had taken her fire ring. The system she had sworn to destroy. "Noah," she whispered, her voice cracking. The sense of betrayal was a physical blow, so sharp and unexpected it stole the air from her lungs. She took a step back from him, her hand instinctively going to the empty space where a weapon would be on a uniform she no longer wore. He turned to face her, and for the first time, she saw a profound sadness in his eyes, a weariness that went far beyond a lack of sleep. "Raylan, I can explain." "Explain what?" she demanded, her voice rising, infused with the heat of her anger and her pain. "That you're one of them, a part of Parallax. Was this whole thing a game? Was the Kismet dawn? Was I—" "No, never," he insisted, taking a step towards her. "It's not what you think." But before he could say more, Kaya's voice screamed in their ears. "It's a trap! Get out of there! Now Ariad Kane just made a move." On Halcyon 9, every public screen flickered to life. Ariad Kane's perfectly composed face appeared, her expression one of grave concern. "My fellow citizens of the Lattice," she began, her voice smooth and reassuring. "For the past several cycles, Halcyon 9 has been the victim of a coordinated campaign of sabotage and destabilization, orchestrated by the fugitive officer Raylan Sareth and her accomplice." An image appeared beside her, a security feed from a docking bay. It showed Noah Calder. He was standing next to a Parallax financial courier, and the courier was handing him a data chip. A transaction record was superimposed on the screen, showing a transfer of 10 million credits to a shielded account. "This man," Ariad continued, "known as Noah Calder, is not the humble mechanic he pretends to be. He is a corporate saboteur, paid to incite unrest. He orchestrated the Kismet Dawn disaster to create a crisis that his partner, Raylan Sareth, used to justify her criminal actions." The video was a lie, a masterful fabrication of spliced footage and falsified data. But it was brutally effective. It was simple. It was believable. The tide of public opinion on the station turned in an instant. The refugees Raylan had saved now looked at her with suspicion. The station personnel who had admired her now saw her as a traitor. She was no longer a hero. She was a villain who had conspired with the enemy for profit. "We have to go," Noah said urgently, grabbing her arm. She flinched away from his touch as if burned. The trust between them, so fragile and new, was shattered. They made it back to the unlikely prospect, just as the vault's internal alarms began to blare. Their escape was a frantic, desperate flight, Zixori pushing the ship's antiquated engines far beyond their limits. Back on Halcyon 9, they were no longer rebels. They were pariahs. Vale was forced to issue a station-wide manhunt. Kaya's office was ransacked. Zixori's lab was sealed. Their small rebellion was crushed. They hid in a forgotten cargo bay in the station's deepest, most derelict sector. The silence in the cramped space was deafening. Kaya was furiously trying to find a way to disprove the video, but the fabrication was too perfect. Zixori was despondent. And Raylan couldn't even look at Noah. Finally, he stood up. "This has to end," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. "She won't stop. She'll tear the station apart to find us. She'll hurt more people." He looked at Raylan, his eyes pleading. "It was all a lie. Raylan, the video, the money, all of it." "But the rest wasn't. Was it?" she shot back, her voice dripping with venom. "Foundry, that's real." "It is," he admitted. "And it's a long story. A story I don't have time to tell you right now." He walked towards the cargo bay door. "What are you doing?" Kaya demanded. "I'm giving her what she wants," Noah said. "She wants a villain. I'll be the villain. I'm turning myself in. They'll stop hunting you. The station will go back to normal." "They'll kill you," Zixori buzzed, his antennae drooping in despair. "Maybe," Noah said. "But at least the rest of you will be safe." He stopped in front of Raylan. The anger, the betrayal, the confusion warred within her. She saw the man who had lied to her, the man who held the key to the galaxy's chains. But she also saw the man who had solemnly eaten a terrible nutrient cake to spare a friend's feelings. The man who had risked his life to connect a single wire to save a group of children he didn't know. She remembered the night of the first flame, how he had stood in respectful silence, how he had learned the traditional greeting in her native tongue, a complex phrase of welcome and respect, and spoken it to her perfectly when the rite was over. It was a detail so small, so personal, it couldn't possibly have been part of some grand deception. He unclipped the F-01 hyperspanner from his belt. The tool was old, worn, its metal scarred from a lifetime of work. It seemed like the most honest thing in the universe. He held it out to her. "Take this," he said, his voice low. "If you trust me, if any part of you still trusts me, use this to open what needs opening." Her hand trembled as she took it. The wrench was heavy, solid, real. It felt like the weight of a promise. He gave her one last, long look, a look filled with a universe of unspoken words. Then he turned and walked out of the cargo bay, his footsteps echoing in the silence as he went to surrender. Raylan was left alone with the wrench in her hand and the ruins of her trust all around her. Justice demanded that she expose Foundry, that she uncover the truth of the Lattice's creation, no matter where it led. But her heart ached with a different kind of truth, the memory of a quiet man's kindness. She looked at the wrench, its simple, analog form, a stark contrast to the complex lies that surrounded them. Use this to open what needs opening. It wasn't just a tool. It was a key. It was a choice. Her fingers tightened around the cold steel. Her choice was clear. She would have justice, and she would have the truth. All of it. Later. Alone. She examined the wrench. It was perfectly balanced. A simple machine. But as she turned it over, her fingers traced a nearly invisible seam along the handle. Following a hunch, a desperate leap of faith, she twisted the handle in a way it was never meant to turn. With a soft click, a small compartment opened. Inside, there was no secret message, no hidden key. There was only a single, tiny data crystal, dark and inert. But when she brought it near her datapad, the crystal pulsed with a faint light, and a single file opened. It wasn't a confession or an explanation. It was a map, a star chart, leading to a hidden orbit, a place of shadow and secrets. And it had a name: the Citadel of Accounts. The Citadel of Accounts did not orbit a star. It existed in a pocket of contrived darkness, a dead zone between systems where the light of the nearest sun was a distant, cold pinprick. It was not a station. It was a monument to power, a spinning black dagger of obsidian and fortified alloys, deliberately designed to be invisible to all but those who knew where to look. It was the heart of the Parallax Consortium, the throne room of the Axiom Loom, and they were flying the unlikely prospect straight into its teeth. "The solar flare is peaking," Zixori announced from the engineering bay, his voice a tense series of clicks and whistles over the comm. "The Citadel's outer sensor grid will be effectively blind for the next 17 minutes. If we are to do this, it must be now." Raylan stood on the bridge, the cold starlight reflecting in her determined eyes. Noah's wrench. The F-01 was clipped to her belt, its solid weight a constant, grounding presence. After his surrender, a fire had been forged in the wreckage of her trust, a cold, hard flame of purpose. She would not only prove his innocence, she would validate the desperate, impossible faith she had placed in him. "Kaya, are you ready?" Raylan asked, her voice calm and steady. "Ready to upload the most incriminating data packet in galactic history directly into the belly of the beast," Kaya Thorne replied from the co-pilot seat, a grim smile on her face. "Oh, I was born ready, Zixori. Give me a clean insertion point." The plan was audacious to the point of insanity. They would use the chaos of the solar storm to get close enough for Kaya to hack a single, unsecured maintenance port. Through that tiny crack in the fortress, she would upload a virus, not a destructive one, but a truth bug designed to copy and broadcast every piece of evidence they had, from the Cytherean key to the faked video of Noah. It was a digital shout for justice into the heart of a silent conspiracy. The unlikely prospect plunged into the electromagnetic chaos of the solar flare. The ship shuddered, alarms blared, and the view outside became a maelstrom of searing white light and coronal loops. Zixori was a whirlwind of motion, rerouting power, venting plasma, keeping their battered ship from being torn apart by the raw power of a star. "I have an opening," Kaya yelled over the roar. "It's a diagnostic port for the waste heat reclamation system. It's ancient, barely shielded. They never thought anyone would be stupid enough to get this close. Sending the bug now." For a tense, agonizing minute, a progress bar crept across her screen. It reached 99%, and then turned a blood red. "Access denied. Override Ariad Kane." Ariad's voice, cool and mocking, filled the bridge. The comm channel had been hijacked. "Did you really think it would be that easy? Officer Sareth, I've been tracking your pathetic Rust Bucket shuttle since you left Halcyon 9. This entire facility has been on high alert, waiting for you. Your little bug is cute, but the master of the house is home." On the main view screen, the image of the solar flare was replaced by a live feed from inside the Citadel. It was a detention cell, cold and white. Noah was there, kneeling on the floor. His hands were bound behind him, not by simple cuffs, but by shimmering bands of golden light quantum shackles, designed to phase through a prisoner's very atomic structure, making escape a physical impossibility. Ariad Kane stood over him, a cruel smirk on her face. "You have a choice, Raylan," Ariad said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You can turn back, and I will allow your foundry a quick, painless death. Or you can continue this foolish assault, and I will deconstruct him, molecule by molecule. Your call." The bridge of the unlikely prospect fell silent. The roar of the solar storm, a distant echo compared to the thunder of Ariad's ultimatum. Kaya looked at Raylan, her face pale. Zixori's antennae drooped. It was over. They had failed. Raylan stared at Noah's image on the screen. He looked up at the camera, his face bruised but his eyes clear. He gave a single, almost imperceptible shake of his head. Don't do it. But Raylan was a daughter of Draco Prime. Her people did not bow to threats. They did not abandon their own. She looked at Ariadne's smug face and felt no fear, only a clarifying, crystalline rage. "Zixori," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Find me the schematics for their primary hangar bay, the one closest to that detention block, and find me the biggest, oldest, most mechanically operated door they have." Ramming the citadel of accounts was not an act of strategy. It was an act of pure, incandescent fury. Zixori pushed the engines into a suicidal overload as Raylan took the manual controls, guiding the shuttle through the last waves of the solar storm. They crashed through the outer magnetic containment field and plowed through the 10-meter-thick hangar doors in a screeching, tearing explosion of metal and ice. The unlikely prospect was a wreck. Its forward section crumpled, but its life support held. Before the Citadel's automated defense systems could even register the impossible breach, Raylan, Kaya, and Zixori, armed with plasma cutters and grim determination, were out of the ship and blasting their way through the corridors. They found the detention block just as internal security drones began to swarm. Zixori, with a manic glee, repurposed a cleaning drone's high-pressure solvent sprayer into a makeshift weapon, gumming up the joints of the security bots and giving them the seconds they needed. They blasted through the cell door and found the scene from the view screen. Ariadne stood there, flanked by 2 elite parallax guards in gleaming black armor. She looked more annoyed than surprised. "Predictable," Ariadne sighed. "All passion, no finesse. You've only succeeded in choosing the more painful option for him." The guards raised their pulse rifles. But Raylan wasn't looking at them. She was looking at the quantum shackles on Noah's wrists. She saw the central locking pin, a small, intricate mechanism glowing with contained energy. "Kaya," she ordered. "The legal framework for those shackles. Every contract, every patent, every piece of parallax proprietary law that governs their use. Find a loophole. Now." "On it," Kaya said, her fingers already a blur on her datapad, as she dove into a warren of corporate legalese. Raylan took a deep breath, centering herself. She ignored the guards, ignored Ariadne. She focused on the fire in her core, the innate thermal control of her people. She took a step forward, and as the guards trained their rifles on her, she exhaled. It was not a plume of fire, but a focused, needle-thin jet of superheated air, a shimmering lance of heat invisible to the naked eye, but hot enough to melt steel. The beam struck the locking pin on Noah's shackles. The metal glowed cherry red, then white, then began to liquefy. At the exact same moment, Kaya shouted, "Got it. Subclause 1138B of the user agreement. The shackle's quantum field is legally contingent on the prisoner's registered identity remaining valid. If that identity is nullified, the operational matrix collapses." She slammed a command into her datapad. "I just filed a deceased notification for one Noah Calder, backdated by 3 days, and had it notarized by a very confused automated clerk on a backwater moon. His legal identity is officially void." Ariadne's eyes widened in disbelief. The golden light of the shackles flickered. The molten locking pin gave way, and Noah was free. He didn't stand up and fight. He did something far stranger. He staggered to the nearest wall of the detention cell, a seamless plate of humming electronics, and pressed his palms flat against it. He closed his eyes. "What is he doing?" Ariadne demanded, her composure finally cracking. Raylan watched, mesmerized. She saw his fingers twitch, not randomly, but in a specific, rhythmic pattern. He wasn't just touching the wall. He was listening to it. He was feeling the thrum of the Citadel's power, the beat of its data, the pulse of its very life. He was a mechanic, not reading a schematic, but diagnosing a living engine by the vibrations in its soul. "The macro valves for the primary coolant system," Noah murmured, his eyes still closed. "They're running on a 3.2-second cycle. The data flow regulators are out of sync by 0.001%. It's causing a harmonic imbalance." With his hands still on the wall, he began to tap. Not a code, but a rhythm. A simple, syncopated beat, far below them, in the Citadel's deepest mechanical bowels. His rhythmic tapping was translated into a series of minute, cascading vibrations. A macro valve, expecting its regular 3.2-second signal, received a pulse a fraction of a second early. It opened. Its neighbor, thrown off by the change, opened late. The harmonic imbalance Noah had sensed was now a full-blown arrhythmia. Alarms began to scream throughout the Citadel. Lights flickered. The entire station shuddered as its core operational rhythm fell into chaos. Ariad stared in horror. This wasn't a hack. This was a hostile, architectural deconstruction from the inside out. "He's not a saboteur," Raylan said, a look of dawning, awestruck understanding on her face. "He's a conductor, and he's making your entire orchestra play out of tune." It was then that the Axiom loom fought back. It did not send drones or guards. It did what it was designed to do. It weaponized finance. A red alert flashed on Kaya's datapad. "My God," she whispered. "It's initiating a debt burn." "What is that?" Raylan demanded. "It's a self-preservation protocol," Kaya explained, her voice frantic. "To protect the core assets of the Parallax Consortium from the instability, the loom is automatically liquidating its highest risk, lowest value accounts. It's freezing the credit lines of every backwater colony, every refugee fleet, every developing world in the 42 systems. It's cutting off their life support, their food shipments, their medical supplies, all to balance its own books. Millions of people. It's going to kill millions of people." On the detention cell monitor, they could see the galactic map, a wave of crimson spreading across the poorest sectors as the Axiom loom began its brutal, automated triage. Noah staggered back from the wall, the effort of his sabotage having taken a heavy toll. He saw the map, the spreading plague of red, and his face was a mask of anguish. This was his creation, his beautiful dream of a connected galaxy, twisted into a weapon of mass destruction. "No," he whispered. He stumbled over to a communications panel, tore it open with his bare hands, and began to splice wires with a desperate urgency. "What are you doing?" Raylan asked. "I can't stop the loom, not from here," he said, his voice ragged. "But I can give people the tools to survive it." He found what he was looking for, a way to hijack the emergency broadcast frequency, the one channel that overrode everything. He opened the channel, not to the Citadel or to Halcyon 9, but to the entire galaxy. His bruised and bloodied face appeared on every screen, in every struggling colony and desperate freighter across the known universe. "This is Noah Calder," he said, his voice not that of a warrior or a leader, but of a simple, tired mechanic. "The system is trying to shut you down. Don't let it. Your systems have manual overrides. They were designed that way." His broadcast was not a speech. It was a tutorial. "To the engineers on the orbital refineries of Cygnus X1, he said, his eyes looking directly into the camera. "Your atmospheric regulator is failing, but the magnetic valve can be bypassed. It's a standard F-series lock. Take a number 3 hyperspanner, attach it to the secondary bolt on the left, and give it a 3/4 turn, counterclockwise. It will hold." He cut to a schematic of a common freighter's life support system. "For the refugee ships in the Asphodel sector, they've cut your power, but your emergency battery has a direct line access port behind the main coolant pipe. You can bridge it to the life support system with a standard gauge copper wire. It will give you another 12 hours. It was a moment of pure, Unadulterated humanity first. A single, powerless man, in the heart of the enemy's fortress, not seizing power, but giving it away. He was telling the forgotten, the indebted, the written off, that they were not helpless. He was reminding them that they had hands, and tools, and the ingenuity to fix what was broken. Across the galaxy, a wave of grassroots rebellion began. In engine rooms and on maintenance decks, mechanics and engineers, the common people who kept the universe running, picked up their tools and began to fight back. They became an army of problem solvers, each person with a wrench, a soldier in a war against an algorithm. In the Citadel's core, Ariad watched her perfectly ordered universe descend into manual, unpredictable chaos. The debt burn was still happening, but now, its victims were fighting back, creating thousands of small, localized miracles that the Axiom loom could neither predict nor stop. Her expression was one of pure, venomous hatred. She turned and fled the detention cell, heading for the one place she could still regain control, the loom's core chamber. "She's going to try and reboot the system, purge the overrides," Kaya yelled. "Go," Raylan said to Noah. "Keep the broadcast going. Give them a fighting chance." To Kaya and Zixori, she commanded, "Plant the bug. Now is our chance. Upload everything." Then she sprinted after Ariad, Noah's wrench in her hand. She cornered her in the antechamber to the core. The room was a maelstrom of energy, the data star of the Axiom loom pulsing angrily behind a containment field. Ariad turned, a thin, cruel smile on her face. A sleek, silver weapon materialized in her hand. "You've been a nuisance, officer," Ariad said. "It's time to write you off the books." She fired. Raylan dove, the plasma bolt searing the air where her head had been. She had no weapon, no armor, only her wits and the fire within. She ripped a metal panel from the wall, using it as a makeshift shield. The fight was brutal and primal. Ariad was a trained corporate killer, her movements precise and economical. Raylan was a brawler, her attacks fueled by righteous fury. She saw the core's primary coolant intake, a massive vent pouring super-chilled gas into the chamber to keep the AI from overheating. An idea, desperate and insane, sparked in her mind. She needed her fire ring, but it was gone, locked away in a vault. So she would make a new one. She ducked behind a console, her heart hammering. She took a deep breath, channeling all her inner heat, not into a beam, but into her hands. She grabbed a piece of jagged metal from the wrecked panel, and with a focused, controlled release of thermal energy, she began to heat it, to shape it. The metal glowed, turning from gray to red to white-hot in her grasp. Ariad advanced on the console, her weapon ready. "Hiding won't save you." Raylan stood up. In her hand, she held a crude, glowing, misshapen circle of molten metal, a temporary fire ring, forged in the heat of battle. Ariad hesitated, confused by the strange sight. In that moment of hesitation, Raylan didn't throw it at her. She threw it past her, into the stream of cryogenic coolant gas. The effect was instantaneous. The molten metal hit the super-chilled gas and vaporized, creating a massive, roiling cloud of superheated steam and incandescent metal particles. A fire mist. The room was plunged into a blinding, searing fog. The Citadel's automated targeting systems, linked to Ariad's weapon, went haywire, unable to get a lock through the thermal chaos. Ariad fired blindly into the mist. Raylan, her Dracoform senses allowing her to see the heat signatures within the fog, moved like a ghost. She closed the distance, and with the heavy, solid steel of Noah's wrench, she delivered a single, disabling blow to Ariad's weapon hand. The gun clattered to the floor. At that moment, the entire Citadel gave a final, shuddering groan, and the primary lights went out, replaced by the dim, red glow of emergency power. "The bug is in," Kaya's voice said in Raylan's ear. The evidence is broadcasting. It's working. Ariad Kane looked at the chaos, at her defeat, and made a final, calculated decision. She activated a personal stealth field and vanished. She had not won, but she had escaped. The immediate effect on the lattice was profound. With its core logic compromised by Noah's rhythmic sabotage and its command structure reeling from the data leak, the Axiom Loom did the only thing it could. It contracted. It pulled back its most aggressive protocols, automatically opening a temporary system-wide humanitarian channel to stabilize the very networks it had just tried to destroy. On the galactic map, the wave of red receded, replaced by a fragile, hopeful green. The debt burn was over. Halcyon 9 was safe. Raylan found Noah slumped over the broadcast panel. The broadcast, finally silent. A wave of energy, a backlash from the chaotic desynchronization of the Citadel's core, had surged through the console. He was unconscious, a thin trickle of blood running from his nose, his body convulsing slightly from the neural feedback. He had poured so much of himself into the machine, and when it broke, a piece of him had broken with it. She knelt beside him. The Citadel was in ruins, its systems failing, a monument to greed on the verge of collapse. Sirens blared in the distance. She looked at Noah's peaceful, unconscious face, and then at the wrench still clutched in her hand. He had given her a key, and she had used it to open the doors of a prison. Gently, she lifted him into her arms. He was surprisingly light. She carried him through the burning, chaotic corridors of the falling citadel, his head resting on her shoulder. The firelight from sparking consoles danced on her platinum scales, and in that moment, she made a silent, solemn vow. To him, to the millions he had saved, to herself. "No one," she whispered into the smoky air, her voice thick with emotion and resolve, "will ever have to trade their fire ring for the right to live again." The escape from the citadel of accounts was not a triumphant flight. It was a limping, bleeding retreat. The unlikely prospect shuddered and groaned, its hull a patchwork of battle scars, its engines held together by Zixori's frantic, six-limbed engineering genius. Raylan piloted them through the fading tendrils of the solar storm, her hands steady on the controls, while Kaya monitored the chaos unfolding in their wake. Noah lay strapped into a medical cot in the back, unconscious, his mind still lost in the violent feedback loop of the collapsing system he had created. Kaya Thorne did not wait for them to reach Halcyon 9. While still in the dark space between worlds, she unleashed her own storm. She took the Databug's payload, the irrefutable proof of the Cytherean key, the recording of Ariad's threats, the falsified video, and the Axiom Loom's genocidal debt burn protocol, and fired it like a shotgun blast at the central servers of the Star Systems Alliance. It was a declaration of war fought not with ships, but with truth. The effect was seismic. The data leak itself was damning. But it was Noah's broadcast, which the public quickly dubbed the Mechanic's Manifesto, that turned the tide from a corporate scandal into a galactic revolution. Billions of people had seen his face, heard his voice. They had followed his instructions, using their own hands and their own tools to save themselves when the system had condemned them. He hadn't spoken of ideology or politics. He had spoken of bypass valves and emergency batteries. He had treated them not as consumers or debtors, but as competent, capable people. It was a message of empowerment, so profound and so simple that it cut through decades of parallax propaganda. The people didn't just believe the evidence against the consortium, they had lived it. Holo channels were flooded with stories of the DIY rescue, of freighter captains and refinery workers becoming heroes, with nothing but a wrench and a piece of advice from a stranger's ghost broadcast. By the time the unlikely prospect limped back into the gravity well of Tethys Prime, they returned not as fugitives, but as reluctant symbols of a rebellion. The warrant for Raylan's arrest had been vaporized by a tidal wave of public outrage. Captain Idris Vale, his face a mixture of terror and grudging admiration, met them at the dock. Parallax security had vanished, replaced by the station's own forces, their expressions no longer hostile, but respectful. Halcyon 9 was, for the first time in a generation, its own master. The days that followed were a blur of healing, both for Noah and for the galaxy. He woke up 2 cycles later in the station's medical bay, the neural feedback having caused a severe but temporary synaptic disruption. The first thing he saw was Raylan, sitting in a chair by his bed, her face etched with exhaustion and worry. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. The silence was filled with everything that had happened between them: the suspicion, the betrayal, the shared terror in the storm, the desperate gambit in the vault. It was Raylan who broke it, her voice soft. "I'm sorry," she said. It was not the formal apology of an officer, but the simple, direct confession of a wounded heart. "I doubted you. When I saw your name on that file, I thought the worst. After all your kindness, I let them turn me against you. I should have trusted you." Noah slowly pushed himself up, wincing. "You had every right to doubt me, Raylan. I lied to you. Not about who I am, but about who I was." He looked down at his hands, the calluses still there, the grease still etched into the lines of his skin. "Foundry was a long time ago. I was young, idealistic. I designed the lattice, the original framework. I thought it would be a tool to connect everyone, to share resources, to make life better. I built it on a foundation of trust." "What happened?" she asked, her voice gentle. "Parallax happened," he said, a shadow passing over his eyes. "They were my partners. They saw my tool not as a way to connect, but a way to control. They twisted it, warped it, built the axiom loom on top of its core. They turned my dream of a network into a cage. When I tried to stop them, they tried to kill me. So I ran. I erased myself. I became a ghost. I thought if I could just live a simple life, fix what was broken right in front of me, maybe I could atone for the monster I'd helped create." He finally met her gaze, his own eyes filled with regret. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I was afraid. And I was ashamed." It was not a full confession. She could feel he was still holding something back. A final, deeper secret, but it was the truth. It was a start. She reached out and rested her hand on his. A simple gesture of acceptance. The wound of betrayal, while not vanished, began the slow, tender process of closing. While they healed, the galaxy convulsed. The Parallax Consortium, once an unassailable titan, began to crumble. Faced with irrefutable proof of their crimes and a stock price in freefall, as entire systems began boycotting the lattice, the shareholders panicked. They turned on their own, issuing public condemnations, freezing the accounts of their own executives. An official, galaxy-wide warrant was issued for the arrest of Ariad Kane on charges of crimes against sentient life. The Axiom Loom, its core logic now under the scrutiny of an Alliance Oversight Committee, was shackled. It was forced to run in a newly created transparency mode, its every transaction, every calculation, laid bare for public review. The age of shadow finance was over. Halcyon 9, once a forgotten backwater, became the unlikely epicenter of this new era. Captain Vale, looking more overwhelmed than ever, found himself chairing meetings with representatives from dozens of newly empowered colonies and stations. Inspired by Raylan's actions, they drafted a new charter for interstellar emergency protocols. No longer would a single corporation hold the keys to survival. A new, jointly administered council was formed to manage the emergency access gates across the 42 systems. The conflict of character versus society was slowly, painfully, transforming into systemic reform. In a gesture of goodwill, the very first act of this new council was to authorize a transfer of funds to the Parallax escrow account. It was not a payment of a debt, but a symbolic act of liberation. A few days later, a small, unassuming courier arrived at Raylan's office. He carried a simple, unadorned box. Inside, resting on a bed of black velvet, was the Seraph fire ring. She lifted it out. It felt heavier than she remembered. It was no longer just a symbol of her family's past, but a testament to a galactic struggle, a reminder of a terrible choice she had been forced to make. That evening, she did not hold a grand ceremony. She went to the small, private chamber in the Dracoform Cultural Center, the one she had shared with Noah. She lit the blue flames of the fire pit and, in a quiet ritual of one, she slid the ring back onto her wrist. It settled into place, a comfortable, familiar weight. It was not a symbol of debt or obligation anymore. It was a symbol of victory, paid for not with credits, but with courage. The spirit of renewal even reached Zixori's lab. After several of his nutrient cakes were used to successfully patch a minor hull breach on the unlikely prospect, he was forced to concede that his recipe might need adjustments. His new creation, Batch 78 Delta, was a startling golden brown color. Kaya, who had developed a severe phobia of his cooking, eyed it with extreme prejudice. But when Noah, now recovered and back in his familiar overalls, tried a piece, a look of genuine surprise crossed his face. "It's not bad," he announced, taking another bite. "It tastes a bit like sweet bread." Zixori's mandibles clicked with unrestrained joy. Aha! The secret was a 2% infusion of synthesized yeast proteins from the Andorian Nebula, a culinary breakthrough. Even in the midst of galactic upheaval, life went on, finding its small, absurd joys. To celebrate the restoration of Halcyon 9's autonomy, Captain Vale held a formal reception in the station's Grand Assembly Hall. It was a stuffy, formal affair, but the entire station turned out, a palpable sense of relief and hope in the air. Raylan attended, wearing her officer's tunic for the first time since she had become a fugitive. Noah, after much persuasion from Kaya, had agreed to come, looking deeply uncomfortable in a borrowed formal jacket. As Raylan was accepting congratulations from a Pelian diplomat, she saw Noah standing awkwardly by a pillar, shivering slightly in the over-chilled hall. She smiled, walked over, and draped her thermal cloak over his shoulders, just as she had done in the frozen corridor after the Kismet Dawn rescue. He muttered his thanks, fumbling with the unfamiliar clasps. A few moments later, as Captain Vale was giving a speech, she glanced over and saw that Noah, in his mechanical distraction, had managed to put the cloak on backwards, the high collar jutting out awkwardly under his chin. A soft laugh escaped her lips. In the middle of the crowded, silent hall, she walked over to him. He looked at her, confused. "What?" he mouthed. Without a word, she reached up and gently turned the cloak around, settling it properly on his shoulders and fastening the clasp. He blinked, a faint blush rising on his cheeks. A few people nearby saw the quiet, domestic interaction. A ripple of warm, knowing smiles spread through that corner of the room. It was a small, human moment that said more than any grand speech. After all the fire and chaos, here was the soft, gentle warmth of peace. But the war was not entirely over. A few days later, a message arrived on Raylan's most secure, private channel. It was a ghost, a single audio file, its origin untraceable. It was Ariad Kane's voice, stripped of its arrogance, laced with a chilling, pragmatic bitterness. "Congratulations, officer," the voice said. "You won the battle. You toppled a few executives, changed a few rules. But don't ever fool yourself into thinking you won the war. Parallax, I was a middle manager. The consortium was just a branch office, a public-facing brand. A pause. You were never fighting the house. You were fighting the dealer. There is a board, Sereth, an Umbra board. They don't have names. They don't use the lattice. They own the table the game is played on. And they don't appreciate people who knock over the pieces. You haven't saved the galaxy. You've just made yourself a much more interesting target. The message ended. It was a seed of ice planted in the heart of their victory. A reminder that the shadows were still there, deeper and darker than they had ever imagined. The revenge she had sought against Ariad was complete, but it had only revealed a larger, more monstrous enemy waiting in the wings. That night, unable to sleep, Raylan found herself in Zixori's now quiet lab. Noah was there, sitting at a workbench, the F-01 hyperspanner in his hands. He was just looking at it, turning it over and over, as if seeing it for the first time. The Oversight Committee had just finished implementing the final protocols for the Axiom Loom's new transparency mode. Across the galaxy, the fundamental operating system of the Lattice was changing, shifting from a predatory model to a public utility. As they sat in companionable silence, a faint light began to emanate from the wrench in Noah's hands. It came from the handle, from the small, hidden compartment where the data crystal was stored. The crystal, which had been dark and inert since they'd left the Citadel, was now pulsing with a soft, steady, blue-white light. Raylan stared at it. "What is that?" Noah's expression was one of dawning, solemn realization. He looked from the glowing crystal to the live feed of the Lattice network on a nearby monitor. "It's a key," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's a dead man's switch. It was designed to only activate if the Lattice's core programming was ever fundamentally altered." He carefully opened the compartment. The crystal was no longer just a map. It was alive, projecting a complex, shimmering data string into the air above it. It was a code, a final set of coordinates, a last will and testament. "I thought the Citadel was the heart of it all," Raylan breathed. "The Citadel was just the bank," Noah said, his eyes wide as he finally understood the final secret he had been keeping even from himself. That is the key to the vault, the real vault." The light from the crystal illuminated the awe and terror on his face. The ultimate secret of the Lattice was finally ready to be opened. The light from the data crystal was not the harsh, sterile light of technology. It was a soft, organic pulse, like a captured star breathing in the palm of Noah's hand. It projected a shimmering, complex string of data into the air, a code that seemed to sing with a silent, ancient music. But as the light washed over Noah, he did not see code. He saw ghosts. He saw a younger version of himself, years ago, his face unlined by grief, his eyes burning with a brilliant, naive optimism. He saw himself standing in a pristine lab, sketching equations of light in the air, designing the foundational architecture of what would become the Lattice. His dream was not of commerce, but of communion. A network that would allow a farmer on a remote agricultural world to share a new, blight-resistant crop with a colony on the other side of the galaxy, instantly, without a middleman. A system where an artist's work could be seen by billions, and a doctor's discovery could save lives 1,000 light-years away. He called it the Lattice because he envisioned it supporting everyone. He signed his creation with the anonymous handle he'd used since he was a boy, tinkering with old Circuit's foundry. The memories flooded back, no longer shielded by the walls of amnesia he had built around his own heart. He saw the partnership with the financiers, who would become Parallax, saw their promises of funding and infrastructure. He saw, too late, how they began to twist his creation. They took his open protocols for sharing and turned them into toll gates. They took his algorithms for resource distribution and repurposed them to calculate debt. They built the cold, predatory intelligence of the Axiom Loom on top of his life's work, turning his dream into a cage. He saw the final, bitter confrontation, their threats, his refusal to give them the final key. And he saw his escape, the faked death, the erasure of his identity, the long, lonely years of hiding in plain sight, punishing himself by fixing the small, broken things in a universe he had unintentionally helped to break on a grand scale. Raylan watched as a storm of emotions passed over his face. "Noah," she whispered, "what is it?" He finally looked up from the glowing crystal, and the last piece of the puzzle, the final, universe-altering truth, was there in his eyes. "When I designed the lattice," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of his own history, "I knew it needed a balance wheel, a central reserve to stabilize the entire network against market shocks or catastrophic failures, a source of liquidity to ensure the system could never truly collapse." He gestured to the shimmering code projected by the crystal. Parallax thought the Cytherean key was the master override. It wasn't. It was just the key to the backup files. This is the key to the engine room, too. The final, impossible truth settled in the quiet of the lab. "It's a wallet," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The master account that underwrites every single credit in the 42 systems. I called it the Genesis wallet." The scale of it was incomprehensible. It wasn't just a fortune. It was the concept of fortune itself, the source code of all wealth. The man who had fixed refugee ships for free, who had lived in a small, greasy corner of a forgotten dock, was, in reality, the silent, unknowing master of the galaxy's entire economy. He hadn't just been hiding from Parallax. He had been hiding from a level of power no single person was ever meant to possess. "You control everything," Raylan breathed, a mixture of awe and terror in her voice. It was in that moment that the final, most profound conflict of their entire journey began. It was not a battle of ships or weapons, but a silent, internal war fought in the space between two hearts. The tool of their ultimate revenge lay in their hands. With a single command, Noah could drain Parallax. He could bankrupt their shareholders, nullify their assets, erase them from existence. More than that, he could rewrite reality. He could flood the accounts of the poor, erase the debts of the oppressed, and forcibly redistribute the wealth of the entire galaxy. He could, with a single keystroke, impose a perfect, mathematical justice on an imperfect universe. The temptation was a living thing in the room. Raylan thought of her fire ring, held hostage. She thought of the children on the Kismet Dawn, their lives treated as a line item on a balance sheet. She thought of Ariad Kane's smug, cruel face. The desire for a final, biblical reckoning was a fire in her own blood. But she looked at Noah. He was not triumphant. He was terrified. He was a man who had seen firsthand how a beautiful idea could be twisted into a monstrous weapon. He had spent years atoning for his unwitting sin, and now he was being handed a power that could make his original mistake look like a child's prank. "We could end it," Raylan said, her voice a tense whisper. "All of it. We could make them pay." "And who would we be then?" Noah asked softly, his eyes searching hers. "Would we be any different from them, using absolute power to impose our own vision of how the universe should be? We fought to give people a choice. Would we take that choice away from them now, just because we can?" His words cut through her anger, finding the core of her own beliefs. She had fought for justice, not for vengeance. She had fought for the principle that no one, not a corporation, and not an individual, should have the right to decide who was worthy of living. To use the Genesis wallet for their own ends would be to become the very thing they had fought against. It was the ultimate test of humanity, to be given the power of a god, and to choose to remain merely human. "No," she said, her voice firm, the fire of her anger cooling into the warm, steady glow of resolve. "We wouldn't. Your creation was corrupted because the power was centralized. The only way to fix it is to give that power away. A plan formed between them, born not of code or strategy, but of a shared philosophy. A love forged in fire and tempered by a profound respect for the dignity of the individual. They would not use the Genesis wallet to punish or reward. They would use it to change the rules of the game, forever. Working together, they used the Foundry-class commands, Noah's forgotten mother tongue, to write a new, unbreakable amendment to the core code of the Lattice. They called it the Humanitarian Covenant. It was a simple, elegant piece of programming. It decreed that a small, fractional percentage of every single transaction, from the purchase of a star system to the sale of a nutrient bar, would be automatically and anonymously tithed into a new, decentralized, and publicly audited universal fund, a life fund, dedicated to disaster relief, refugee aid, and basic subsistence for the most vulnerable. It was not a redistribution of wealth. It was a constant, gentle, self-sustaining stream of compassion woven into the very fabric of commerce. It was a tax on greed, paid for by the system itself. But they knew a law was only as strong as its lock. The Umbra Board, whatever it was, would surely try to undo it. They needed a failsafe that could not be broken or controlled by any single entity. "The Covenant needs an activation key," Noah said, looking at Raylan. "A final lock that no one can bypass." Raylan looked down at her wrist, at the platinum circlet that had been taken and returned. Her fire ring, a symbol of family, duty, and now, of a victory won for the entire galaxy. "It needs 2 keys," she corrected him. Their final piece of code was a work of genius, a blend of ancient tradition and futuristic technology. The Humanitarian Covenant could only be modified or repealed by a dual authorization. The first key was the unique, ancient data filigree of the Seraph fire ring. The second was a dynamic, multi-signature approval from the newly formed Emergency Protocol Council, a democratic vote from the common people of the galaxy. No single person, not even Noah, could ever undo it. The power was finally, truly, in the hands of the many. As they were uploading the final lines of their code, a priority alert flashed on Kaya's terminal. Ariad Kane had been captured. She had been found trying to board a transport in a remote, lawless sector. Her arrogance replaced by a quiet, desperate fear. Her preliminary interrogation confirmed everything they had suspected. Parallax was just a business. The Umbra Board was the true power, a secret cabal of the galaxy's oldest, wealthiest families, who viewed star systems as their personal property and the Lattice as a tool to manage their assets. Ariad had been nothing but a well-paid functionary, and in her failure, she had been cast out, left to fend for herself. Justice, it seemed, had a way of finding even those who lived in the shadows. But the greater threat remained, a promise of a future conflict. With the Covenant securely in place, locked by their 2-key system, Noah faced one last decision. He looked at the shimmering code of the Genesis wallet, the ultimate concentration of power in the universe. And then, with a quiet finality, he typed one last command. He didn't delete the wallet. He atomized its control, linking its release authority to the same dual-key system as the Covenant. He voluntarily, permanently, irrevocably gave up his godlike power, scattering it to the winds of democracy. The ghost of Foundry was finally, peacefully, laid to rest. In the aftermath, a new kind of quiet settled over Halcyon 9. The station was no longer just a transit hub, but a symbol of hope, a model for a new, fairer galaxy. The story of the Dracoform officer and the humble human mechanic who had stood up to the galaxy's masters became a quiet legend, whispered in engine rooms and cantinas across the 42 systems. Their own small corner of the universe found its own peaceful rhythm, Raylan. Her family's honor, restored not by a strategic marriage, but by her own courage, was offered a high-ranking position in the new Alliance Council. She politely declined, choosing to stay on Halcyon 9, rebuilding her Interspecies Integration Bureau on a foundation of dignity, not credit scores. Noah went back to Dock 27. He still fixed engines. He still helped those who couldn't afford to pay. He was happier than he had been in years. In his small workshop, in a simple glass case on the wall, two objects were mounted side by side: an ancient, worn F-01 hyperspanner and a gleaming platinum fire ring. They were not trophies. They were a reminder, a symbol of how the hard, practical work of a single hand, guided by the fiery, principled heart of another, could protect and reshape the entire galaxy. To celebrate the official ratification of the Humanitarian Covenant, Zixori, now the celebrated and feared head of the station's new Terraforming and Nutrition Division, threw a party. He proudly unveiled his latest culinary masterpiece: small, perfectly round, vibrantly purple cakes. Batch 92 Epsilon. He announced to the assembled crowd of Raylan, Noah, Kaya, and Captain Vale. The flavor profile is a delicate fusion of Rigelian berry algae and the subtle, earthy notes of processed silicate. A triumph. Kaya suddenly remembered a very important legal brief she had to file. Captain Vale developed a sudden, hacking cough. Raylan, however, simply smiled. Noah, with the stoic resolve of a man who had faced down the galaxy's darkest powers, picked up one of the purple cakes and took a bite. He chewed, his expression a perfect mask of neutrality. He swallowed. "It's very purple," he offered. Raylan laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. She looked at this quiet, extraordinary man, at her strange and wonderful friends, at the bustling, hopeful life of the station all around them. The Umbra board was still out there, a shadow on a distant horizon, a promise of another fight on another day. But here, now, in this moment, there was peace. There was community. There was love. She leaned her head on Noah's shoulder, watching him bravely take another bite of the terrible cake. "This," she whispered, her voice filled with a warmth that had nothing to do with her Dracoform biology. "This is what it feels like to be truly rich.